Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Facebook Live. Well, it's been an interesting few weeks in racing, and I'm joined today by our General Manager of Racing, Tim Aldridge, which is great to see. Tim plays an important part in the team at NZTR, running the Bureau, handicapping and programming, part of the engine room that puts racing on every week. But we haven't had racing, and we're looking forward to getting back racing on the 20th of June. It's fantastic to see that we can come back early at counties, and moving to level 1 also gives us the opportunity to get crowds back to the races. So really encourage everyone that's watching today or listening today to get your backside trackside on Saturday week. This week we've also seen a response to the racing bill. The Select Committee have reported back to Parliament on their proposed changes to the bill, and appreciate the government. This will be two bills, two pieces of legislation in 15 months. And thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, and our Racing Minister has done an outstanding job with Rita in developing these changes with the three codes. We've seen improvements to the TAB governance model. We've seen improvements to the way the codes and Rita will handle IP. We've seen some enhancements to how venues and the codes can work together in the event that a venue is no longer required. Improvements to the offshore betting charges, really important part of the commercial outcomes for all the three codes in New Zealand in getting appropriate fees collected from Australian customers that are betting with Australian operators betting on New Zealand product. The creation of Racing NZ, a forum where the three codes can come together and talk about common interests around the Racing Integrity Board, the performance of the TAB, setting race dates, any other matters the codes believe that they could work together on. So it's not a body that we create large amounts of staff in. It's about getting the opportunity to get some economies of scale and work together for the benefit of the three codes, but each importantly still developing their own brand, for example, New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. And as you're well aware, over the last couple of weeks, Rita have been putting in place a range of cost reduction programs to the point of $10 or $11 million annually a year. And they're not easy things to do from a business perspective, or is it easy? It's not easy when you're talking about people's lives and making people redundant and putting new positions in place. And they're processes that take time, and we are working with Rita to ensure that they are run as efficiently as possible. And Dean McKenzie, the chair of Rita, on behalf of Rita, have put out an update today. And I do encourage you to go to the Rita website, rita.org.nz, for the latest on what's happening in the Rita space in response to the bill, and also in an update on the cost reduction programs that Rita are progressing. As I said today, we've got Tim Aldridge joining us, the General Manager of Racing and Infrastructure. Tim's been knee-deep with our stakeholders talking through our revamp of racing, and we've got some questions, Tim, which is great to see. But let's first of all it's great to have you on board and give us a bit of an overview of what's been happening in the racing space.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bernard. Well, there's been plenty happening, as Bernard's mentioned, I guess. Of interest to pundits and stakeholders is probably the return to racing policy and how that's going to come about going forward. NZTR have been fortunate to work with some of the leading trainers in New Zealand and also the major racing clubs, and putting together ideas and rules and regulations that make the return to racing, will maximise the benefits, I guess, of the return to racing. Some of the early signs we've had have been really, really good. Yesterday being a great example of that, where 290 horses went round at Turapa. That's a massive amount of horse flesh going around over 33 heats, and it was a marathon day for the guys involved there. And that told us that there's a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm for a return to racing, probably to the point where we need to look at what we can do to maximise the opportunities for these horses and make sure that that horses and connections aren't kept on the sideline any longer than they need to be. Just while on trials, there's 126 horses entered at Rangiora. Those trials are tomorrow, just north of Christchurch. And as I understand, that's the biggest number of trialists in the Canterbury region for 13 years. So the enthusiasm levels are good. And it's just now, I guess, the waiting game in terms of 10 days' time or thereabouts to get back onto the track. Some of the things around the racing policy that we did, we intentionally noted to be flexible. It was a moving feast right through the COVID process, and so we've been looking at things along the lines of trials. Originally, we had a one trial policy. We're looking to review that. Originally, we were, I guess, sceptical in terms of the amount of horses, the available number of horses to return to racing. Clearly, the signs we're getting from them now is that that number is very, very strong. So we're looking at what we can do around that one trial policy. There's also welfare issues around the jockeys. So we factored in amongst our handicapping policy, with the help of trainers, a 1 kg allowance. Now, whilst COVID may have ended, it's still important that we look after our riders. The message was given to them that they have this flexibility for a period of time, and the intention is for that to continue through to 31 July. So I guess that's one less thing that our riders need to worry about, and it's important that we have them in tip-top shape. So those are a couple of the things in terms of the trials and the return to racing. We're looking in terms of monitoring numbers of horses and what we can do going forward to ensure, as I mentioned, that all horses get an opportunity at the earliest time possible. So there are some questions, and I'm happy to talk about around the open entry framework that's been advertised, and we'll probably get back to that one in a minute, Ben.
Yeah, no, keep going, Tim. Keep going. That's good information for our listeners today and viewers.
Okay, so in terms of the open entry system that we have advertised, how that will work, and it's new for us as well to some degree, is that we have advertised distances of races and asked trainers to nominate their horses in their preferred distances. The reason we've gone down that road is to get the most horses out on the track as we can. We certainly don't want to be having 5 and 6 horse fields when we kick off, and that's certainly not the intention, and that won't be happening. So we've asked trainers to nominate for a specific distance. Once those nominations shut at midday on the Tuesday, we'll probably produce some phantom fields in terms of how those horses are grouped together. We're trying to keep like with like as much as we can. That won't always be possible. It won't always be possible to end up in the exact race that you want to end up, but we'll do our best to accommodate as much as we can. After that process is done, it'll be a chance to engage with trainers. They may want to withdraw for whatever reason. But the idea is at that point to engage in trainers and end up getting their particular horse into the race that suits them the best. So there'll be some juggling around at that point. I think from memory, counties, we advertise 5 distances. That certainly doesn't mean to say there's 5 races or 6 races or 7 races. Our hope is on the 20th of June to have 10 races. Just bearing in mind that it is almost the shortest day of the year, and so there are some light restrictions around that. But we'll be doing our best to accommodate many horses on that day as we can. There's been talk about not enough opportunity, so we're trying to address that, and we'll be doing that as an ongoing basis. We do have some restrictions, certainly in June and July, around the tracks that we're able to use, and so we've got to bear that one in mind as well. One of the other questions I had, just to digress into a completely different topic, is a question around jump racing in the South Island. It was our hope to have jump racing in the South Island revamped this winter. Unfortunately, that hasn't been possible, and it's a shame for a large amount of enthusiasts that have really put on a whole lot of effort down there to get jump racing back to where it was maybe 10 or so years ago. So it's disappointing, but in order to have jump racing down the South Island, we needed to have racing through that May, June, and July period, and unfortunately, that hasn't been possible. But we certainly haven't put an end to jump racing in the South Island. We hope to revisit that going forward. So that's where we sit at the moment.
Thanks, Tim. Good update, and please send your questions through. As Tim's the font of all knowledge when it comes to racing. I'll keep moving. So what we are doing today is we've got a bunch of questions that have come through, and we've put them into key themes. So Tim's dealing with the racing questions, open noms, number of races, venues, what our restrictions are, and a racing policy that is we've targeted to be as flexible as possible. But as we all are aware, when we went into COVID, when we went into lockdown with the pandemic, we didn't know what it would look like on the other side. We did some planning, and we always said we needed to be flexible. So as Tim's indicated, if we need to change up that policy as we learn more over the next couple of weeks, we'll certainly listen and adapt as we go. Got another question coming over?
Oh, your question just came in around the just around the money side of racing, and will there be any nomination fee if you end up at a race which is not suitable for you? The answer is, if you nominate and you end up racing, there'll be no fee charged. This is outside black type racing. If you nominate and you gain a field which may not be your liking, you will still have to either start in that race or pay a fee. So we just need to be clear about that. It's free racing for horses that start, but there are fees for horses that scratch and withdraw. So it's still a significant step forward in terms of the cost to owners.
Yep, good work. Thanks, Tim. So I'll keep moving. There's a couple of questions around the Cambridge all-weather track, and two questions in particular. When do you envisage work will commence on buildings and grandstands at Cambridge? Well, as part of the project, a review of facilities and investment is being considered. But I think what's important to note here, that race dates at Cambridge will be midweek winter, and the expectation of winter racing generally in terms of public attendance, we don't expect to see many more than 200 to 300 people on track at any one time at those meetings. Very much the Cambridge Synthetic. It's a fantastic investment by the government, by the Cambridge Jockey Club and Rita, to put in place a facility, a world-class facility for training, trials and racing in winter. And we see this as for another word, a TV product where you can sit at home and enjoy racing on a consistent surface in the middle of winter. Another question on the Cambridge all-weather track. As I understand, in Australia, there are many different types of tracks, and is the best one being used in New Zealand year-round? And a question customers asked us, I've seen pictures of the progress of the Cambridge track, and it looks like that's tar sealing that they're seeing now as we build out what we call the civil works, getting the foundation right. So what I can explain to you is what you're seeing is tar sealing, and that is a chip seal layer over the base that provides a waterproofing layer. What goes on top of that, which are the next stages, there is a final drainage layer and then a layer of the poly track surface, which is another 150 mil of track surface that gives it the porous surface. It's a mixture of fibre and sand and emulsions, and it's the same surface that's used in Hong Kong, the UK, Singapore, and on training tracks and race tracks in Australia. So it's well tested. Polytrack has a fantastic reputation across the world, and we're looking forward to having horses on the track in the third quarter of this year. Racing media, lots of questions around racing media. What's happening with trackside radio, trackside presenters? Well, trackside radio programming will not resume as it was cancelled in March. The changes to trackside and the number of presenters, Rita have made a decision in order to be more cost-saving measures and looking at ways to present racing differently. Those industry days will be produced from the studio, but it will be a number of meetings where they will have Encore's presenters to bring the colour and the movement, and interviews with trainers and jockeys and owners as we go forward. The other question, in addition to that whole racing media landscape, where can I listen to interviews of trainers and jockeys and owners on the radio? Well, Love Racing will start to step into that space. We saw yesterday T Rapa with 33 trials, Tainer and Adele out doing interviews, and all those interviews can be seen on loveracing.nz now. We're also working with Trackside to support some of the vision they're capturing to push that out on our digital platforms. We all understand that digital is the future, and we also understand we've got to be cost effective in the delivery of racing in order that racing can deliver more money out to participants in prize money. But we've also got to find that other balance. How do we tell the story of racing for our trainers, our jockeys and owners? And that's a responsibility that not only falls, it's a dual responsibility between the code, us, NZTR, Love Racing and the TAB, and we're working with those three groups to make sure that we can bring as much content to you as possible. Where will the fields be? Question around fields and newspapers. Once again, Rita have made a decision not to fund form guides in papers. We're actively pursuing discussions as three codes with some of those newspaper mastheads to see what might be available in terms of the publishment of fields and form on digital, on not only in paper but also on our digital networks. Is race form coming back soon? So I had a talk to Dennis Ryan this morning, who does a fantastic job in the editor of race form. He's working through what I'll call the mechanics of getting the publication up back in the marketplace, working with Rita to determine that the flow of fields and form and the publishing requirements to keep the form guide at a standard that Dennis and his advertisers are used to. And I'm hopeful in the next couple of months we'll see race form back in the marketplace and a really important tool for punters right across New Zealand. Stakes, any idea what our coming stakes will be? Well, I know this has been an unusual year, and we'll get some guidance from Rita, because ultimately the funding for the three codes comes from Rita, from the wagering profits generated from the TAB, and we'll get guidance on that later in June, likely to be the 24th to the 26th of June. And once we get that guidance, we'll be able to provide some information on stake levels early July. But there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, building out models, and I know Rita are working hard to get as much money into the budget as possible in order to feed out the industry to stakes that can flow down to our participants. As far as Rita's concerned, questions around the Encore's totes. I think I probably dealt with that last week. Clearly, what Rita have identified is it is a cost to run the Encore's totes. We had a meeting last week of our major clubs, the codes and Rita to work through a transition plan. And you'll notice in the Rita update that there is good work going on between the bodies to find a way to build out a transition plan over the next 12 months that we can manage this move to digital. We all realise that there's new technology. We have to take advantage of new technology, but we also have to understand we need to build out a transition. So thank you to the clubs. Thank you to the codes. Thank you to Rita for having that discussion last week and finding new ways to operate. And we also understand the importance of the customer being on track and being used to that face-to-face betting experience. A couple of questions from Scotty. Why didn't we get a Strathair track? Well, clearly having a Strathair track is a reinforced sand fibre turf track. So that's a bit like the Moonee Valley track, and it's a grass track. It can't sustain. It can run consistently in all weather for about 25 to 30 times a year. What an all-weather track does, and that's a synthetic track, that allows training and trialling 52 weeks of the year. You couldn't do that on a Strathair track. But hopefully, as we build out the venue plan further in years to come, I'd love to see a Strathair track in New Zealand. It builds consistent surfaces. It can take lots of rain and lots of water, but you can only really race on these tracks 25 to 30 times a year, whereas a synthetic track gives you access to that track year-round for training, trialling and racing. Sean from down south, will we be employing tote staff on 17th of July? Sean, that is the intention, and I think we'll provide that information to you, but certainly through that ramp-up period, Rita have been terrific, so have the clubs and the codes, and there's a solution there that we'll work with you on. Scotty, again, under the new racing bill, will Ellerslie Te Rapa be sold up to fund improved stakes? That whole venue plan and how venues are structured and managed, our first preference from NZTR's perspective is to work in regions. And the legislation that will be passed does give the opportunity for the code and the club to sit down and work through a process of which the minister would have the final say, and that would be subject to review. There are other conditions and pieces of criteria that have been put in this second bill. Now that's an absolute backstop for us, but what's important is that we want clubs in region to take responsibility for their future. It's not about putting money into NZTR's pockets, it's about clubs in regions, whether it's Southland, Otago, Canterbury, Palmerston, the CD, Waikato or Auckland. The future, the solid future and the success of New Zealand racing will come with clubs working together in regions. And we'd like nothing more for 4 or 5 clubs to come to us in regions, or 3 clubs, and come to NZTR and say, we've got a plan that we know how to develop out the future of racing in our region. That's our number one priority. But yes, there is legislation in place that allows us to work with the government and with the club to find a solution in that environment. Other questions coming thick and fast, which is great. Good to see the questions. Scotty, lots of questions from Scotty. Thanks, mate, for being part of today's Facebook Live. A bit of conjecture out there about the outstanding debtors balance at NZTR. Can you clear up this matter by providing detail about what is behind this large balance? This is a question that's come up every time, and I think it arises from the annual report last year, where at a given point in time, in a business that has revenue of $80 million, we had 1.7 million outstanding. But that's from a whole lot of different groups. When it comes to trainers and owners, our 90-day debtors as of today is under $100,000, right? So it's not 1.7. We've got an active program where we go out and collect debts. We have people ringing. We have people paying. We have people on payment plans. So the 1.7 was a moment in time when the auditors and our finance team ruled a line in the books. So I said we weren't going to have this discussion again, but it is. It's been said. If the best way I can explain it, there's $100,000 that are 90 days or more, and for those people that aren't paying 90 days, haven't paid their debt within 90 days, they are stopped from participating in racing. Stop nominations, and if there's a trainer out there that has a debt in excess of 90 days, they won't be licensed for the new season. Thank you for that. Mary, any other questions? Or Tim?
Yep.
Good. Yep. Tim's got another update for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple here. So one of the questions from Deborah is, will more races be added to the first meeting at Waikato? So Te Rapa come online in terms of a race day on Saturday the 4th of July. The intention is to work with the Waikato Racing Club, Butch Castles and the team, and certainly maximise the amount of horses that can go around and the amount of races that can be run on that day. So that's the plan, re Te Rapa. I know Te Rapa have been doing some work around Te Rapa TV, and it was good to see some of those interviews off the back of the trials yesterday, including a slightly longer one with Graham Rogerson at the end of the day. So there's some good work going on there. One here from Jim. So in terms of maidens going into rating 65 races, they're often competing against winners of 5 and 6 races. Why not program races for 1-win horses? So we've had this debate a number of times over the years. The fact is that the stats tell us in terms of horses winning rating 65 races that that the winners come from right across the board. With the open entry races, there may be an opportunity to race maidens with maidens and 1-win horses with 1-win horses. We just have to see what nominations we get at the time. But certainly the aim of the handicapping system, be it open entry or the traditional system that we have, is for racing to be competitive and for all horses to enter a race with the chance of being able to win that. And the stats we have in terms of results back that up.
Thanks, Tim. There's another question there on the CD, but while Tim's getting his hand on that question, Scotty Lamb's asked again, so what's the balance now of debtors? It's approximately $300,000 in debts. at 30 days, at 60 days, and 90 days. And as I explained before, the 90 days is circa 100,000. So that's the position, and we're actively pursuing those debts. And there are implications for people that don't pay. Thanks, Scotty, for raising those questions.
Just one question here around the CD and going back early. As I mentioned earlier, one of the restrictions we have in June and July is that we need to, it's a requirement and the need to run on fibre tracks. So that's why for that first 6 weeks, we need to utilise Wanganui and Awapuni tracks, and both those tracks will certainly be getting a good workout. So it is difficult to add extra meetings to those 2 tracks in that first week, but once we're in August, the tracks that we're able to use will open up considerably.
Thanks, Tim. Another question from Paul Moroney. Sorry, Paul, it's a good question. I don't know any synthetic surface worldwide that's trialled or raced on 52 weeks a year. Yes, that's right. And if I've misled you there, they can be worked on. I mean, there are horses that work on synthetic tracks year round, and we won't race on them 52 weeks a year. There will be, sets of trials. We can run more sets of trials compared to a grass track. So if I did mislead you, I apologise for that, Paul. But it is something that can be worked on, save for the occasional renovation or maintenance that has to be done on those surfaces. But it is a surface that can be used regularly for training on a daily basis. But for racing and trialling, yes, it's not 52 weeks of the year. But thanks for raising that, and I hope that's clarified the situation. Okay, I hope today's been some use. Really good questions. Tim's done a fantastic job bringing us up to date with what's happening in the racing. And if you think this is a good idea, let us know, because we can change it up if you'd like to see improvements. Your feedback's really important to us. Thank you. Enjoy the weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you at Counties on the 20th of June, and enjoy the week ahead. Thank you.
It's been
Thanks, Tim.